Turn the lights on for the Tyler Bright and Early podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Bright. PBJ Productions, official flagship podcast for all things college football centered. And yes, I did wear this in the last episode. I'm recording these back to back because I got a busy schedule. I'm trying to get ahead of the curve, because I'm going to be on the road traveling all across the U.S. I'm going to be in the Des Moines, Iowa. I'm also going to be down in Florida. I'm going to be in northern Michigan where there's not a lot of internet. So I'm getting out the content. I'm pumping it out. I'm excited to talk all things college football, starting off with the ACC. Now, in the last episode, we talked about the win totals, did about half of the teams in the ACC, and I'll go through them right there where I had them in the last episode. So first off, I talked about Clemson. I had them going over 9.5 wins. Louisville going over 8.5 wins. Miami over 8.5. SMU over 8.5. Or Florida State under 7.5, and then Georgia Tech over 7.5. And I will admit, I need to probably, obviously, if I have all these overs, they're going to kind of battle each other. I'm not looking that too much deep into it. I'm just kind of looking at it from a simple perspective of where I think these teams are going to be. Are they going to win over this round? Are they going to, because I think a lot of these games can go either way. They're toss-ups. They're toss-ups. But nonetheless, we'll move on to the second half of the AC. Oh, and North Carolina. I think I also had North Carolina going under 7.5. Forgot about them. But starting off, we got the Duke Blue Devils. They're at 6.5 wins. They are coached by Manny Diaz, who is in his second season at the helm of the Blue Devils. A school that's very known for basketball. Had some pretty decent seasons, especially 2 years ago. Back in 2023, they went 8-5 under Mike Elko, and even had a better season in 2024, going 9-4 and losing in the Gator Bowl to Ole Miss. But how will they do in 2025? That's the main question. They had a couple of transfers coming into the program. They got Darian Mensah from Tulane. I think that's a pretty good get. They lost Malik Murphy, who was their quarterback. But their schedule so far in 2025, they host Elon on August 28th, then Illinois, at Tulane on September 13th, September 20th, they face NC State, at Syracuse, at Cal, Georgia Tech, at Clemson, at UConn, Virginia, at North Carolina, and Wake Forest. And, Duke, I really liked what they were this past season, but also 6.5, I think they're gonna go over. I think. But I can even see them, they face Illinois, which, they had a really great season as well, but typically when Illinois has a really strong season one year, they usually fall right back down to earth in the next season. So we'll see how that goes. NC State, that's a team that I like. At Syracuse, I really like Syracuse too, since they got Fran Brown. Virginia, at North Carolina. I'm going to go over 6.5 wins. So moving right along after the Duke Blue Devils. By the way, these win totals are brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. That's where I'm getting my totals from. That just crashed, but so stand by. We're going through the totals, but so we did the Duke Blue Devils. Next up is the NC State Wolfpack. They are set at 6.5, and Dave Doran, he's been there for 13 years. It's a long time to be a head coach somewhere. I'm not sure who the longest tenured head coach is. I'd have to look at that off the top of my head. I can't remember. Probably not as long as I think. But I think they're a good team. They're usually always a very respectable team. NC State is, and last season they went 6-7, so not as hot as what they had been. They got a new offensive coordinator and a new defensive coordinator. And their schedule looks as follows. They have East Carolina, Virginia, at Wake Forest, at Duke, Virginia Tech, Campbell, at Notre Dame, at Pitt, Georgia Tech, at Miami, Florida State, and North Carolina. And wow, that is a tough schedule. It's tough with this team because I feel like their first half of their schedule is not that tough. East Carolina, they can give them a fight in that one. Virginia or the Pirates, I'm saying that from the Pirates' perspective. Virginia, I think they can beat them. At Wake Forest, they could beat them. Duke, it's going to be a challenge on the road. Virginia Tech could go either way. Campbell, they'll be at Notre Dame, they'll lose. This is where they get into the second half of the season. At Pitt, that's going to be tough. Georgia Tech, at Miami, Florida State, and North Carolina. That is a brutal 4-game slate right there. I'm going to say under for 6.5, but I think they're the perfect 6-6 team, but they're going to upset someone really good as well. They've, that's pretty much all I can really say. They got, they got some good players. They have CJ Bailey, Hollywood Smothers, Noah Rogers, Wesley Grimes, but we'll have to see from this Wolfpack team. Virginia Cavaliers, they're set at 6.5 wins, and I'm going under. I think Tony Elliott's going to get fired. I just don't know what they do very good. He's an offensive guy, but they're not really good on offense. So what does this Virginia team have to bring? I just 6.5 seems fairly high. I don't see it. I know they went 5-7 last season. I just do not see it. They host Coastal Carolina to start off the year at NC State, William and Mary, Stanford, Florida State, at Louisville, Washington State, at North Carolina, at Cal, Wake Forest, at Duke, and Virginia Tech. I just don't see it. I don't see it. I don't even know what else to say. I know they went 5-7, and I know they brought in Chandler Morris, who was previously at SMU, but I don't know. I just feel like Virginia's just not. They're not going to go. I feel like they need to make a bowl game if Tony Elliott's not going to get fired, and I just don't see it. I don't see it. So I'm going to go the under, and I think they're going to clean house. But yeah, that's the Cavaliers. Although they do have the easiest schedule in college football, I think it's a pretty easy schedule. But I also just don't think they're that good of a team. So yeah, some of the other win totals. So Virginia Tech is set at 6.5 wins. The Hokies. That's interesting. They have Virginia Tech at 6.5, but that's so weird to me. But they start off, they go a neutral site game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, against the South Carolina Gamecocks, Vanderbilt, Old Dominion, Wofford, at NC State, Wake Forest, at Georgia Tech, Cal, Louisville, at at Florida State, Miami, and at Virginia. And what was the total again? 6.5. I'm gonna go under. I think this is also another key and pivotal season for Brent Pry. He's been there for 4 seasons, has a new offensive coordinator, has a new defensive coordinator. I don't know. It's just I don't know what am I going to see from this Virginia Tech team? I feel like they're always a team that's supposed to do better than what they do. And they just, I don't know. I don't really see it from this team. So next up, we got the Boston College Eagles. Also, another team that gave Louisville a scare last year. If Castellanos doesn't get hurt, there's a good chance that Boston College beats them. Their win total is set at 5.5 wins. Well, let's take a look at their schedule. Boston College, coached by Bill O'Brien, which, by the way, I love Bill O'Brien as a college coach, as a college head coach. Honestly, I don't even think he was that bad of a head coach in the NFL. I just think when he took that GM spot and traded away Hopkins, I just think the ship sailed from there. It was just doomed to fail. And it was a terrible GM. But as a head coach, he was really good, especially when he was at Penn State. And they had all those sanctions going on with the Sandusky issues going on. He was a really good coach. And I think he's going to be a great coach for Boston College. But so let's take a look at their schedule. They got Fordham. Then they go on the road at Michigan State, at Stanford, California, at Pitt, at host Clemson, host UConn, at Louisville, Notre Dame, SMU, Georgia Tech, and at Syracuse. So that 5.5 wins. Fordham, I think they could win. Stanford, I think they should win. Cal, they should win. UConn, they should win. Then that's where it gets tough from there. So I think they're 5-7 because, could they upset someone? Sure. I just don't know who it is, especially since Castellanos isn't there anymore. I believe he went to Florida State. So it's just tough. I just don't really see that happening. So the Pitt Panthers, 5.5 wins. Pitt started off really hot. I believe they started off 7-0 and finished 7-5. I don't know. This this Pitt team, Pat Narduzzi, I think he is a good coach, but I don't think he's a great coach. I feel like, I don't know. It's just, how do you go from 7-0 and go to 7-6 just is beyond me. I don't. I was expecting them to put up a fight against Louisville, and they just folded up shop. So they start off against Duquesne. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, even though it looks like Duquesne. I think it's Duquesne, which is another Pitt school, I believe, on August 30th. Central Michigan on September 6th at West Virginia, Louisville, Boston College at Florida State at Syracuse, NC State at Stanford, Notre Dame at Georgia Tech, and Miami. 5.5. Yeah, I'm gonna go under. I just don't. I don't think they're gonna do it. They're probably gonna beat Duquesne in the opener. They'll probably beat Central Michigan. Like, they could go 3-9, dare I say it. I don't know. And this could be the year that they axe Pat Narduzzi, but he's been there a long time, 11 seasons as I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, just not very high on the Pitt Panthers. Syracuse at 5.5 wins. I really like Fran Brown. I really like what he's been doing. And it seems like, from the looks of it, that he's going to be there a long time. He's happy where he's at. He's a Camden, New Jersey guy. He likes the Northeast. I think he's pretty comfortable with where he's at. This is really interesting. They went 10-3 last season, and their win total is at 5.5. That is really odd. Really interesting, but maybe that's because they have a tough schedule. And right off the bat, they do face Tennessee down in Atlanta, so that's going to be a tough one. Then they host UConn, Colgate, at Clemson, Duke, at SMU, Pitt, at Georgia Tech, North Carolina, at Miami, at Notre Dame, Boston College. I'm going to take the over. 5.5 wins. I don't know. That seems really low for a team that went 10-3. Like, obviously, yes, they could lose. They can lose to Tennessee. That's one loss. Clemson, that's another loss. At SMU, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Notre Dame. So maybe it is a little bit more closer than I think. I don't think they're going to be as good as what they were in 24. I think they're kind of going to be hovering around the 6 to 7, 8 wins. 8 wins at best, I think. But I think they could upset someone really, too. They did it last year against Miami. I don't know. 5.5. I guess they need to go 6-6 to go over that 5.5 total. So maybe, yeah. I don't know. I like Fran Brown. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's grown a lot. I think he's really kind of flourished, or it's made this Syracuse team really flourish. And that's all you could ask for a coach, especially since Syracuse, for a while, just, they had Dino Babers and he was a good coach for a while, but eventually I feel like it just kind of leveled out and just kind of became a lame duck team. I don't know. But yeah, so we got 2 more teams left. We got the Wake Forest Demon Deacons at 4.5 wins. So this is a Wake Forest team that is coached by Jake Dickert. He's entering his first year, coming over from Washington State. Kind of an interesting hire for the Demon Deacons. This is a guy who hasn't really coached much in the Southeast or in that Atlantic Coast Conference region, doesn't have any ties to the ACC, but now he's coming over here. And the schedule, they host Kennesaw State to start off the year, Western Carolina, NC State, Georgia Tech, at Virginia Tech, at Oregon State, SMU, at Florida State, at Virginia, North Carolina, Delaware, and at Duke. And it's just a tough schedule. I think 4.5 is actually a pretty good total. I can kind of see it going either way, but if you had to choose, I'm going to take the under. I think 4-8 is pretty reasonable. Jake Dickert, but I do like the Jake Dickert hire. I'm just not sure how is he going to develop in that region. And I do think that is a little bit of an overrated preconceived notion that, just because these coaches aren't used to coaching in that region doesn't mean that they can't be successful. I mean, Nick Saban is a perfect example of that. He spent pretty much his entire time coaching in the Midwest, being an assistant coach at Kent State, Ohio State, head coach at Toledo, head coach at Michigan State. And then he goes to LSU and starts dominating and wins the national championship. Then he goes to Alabama after spending some time in the pros with Miami and wins national championships. So I do think that's kind of an overrated comment that's made a lot in the sport, but it is something to bring up. It is something to talk about and be a conversation of. Last but not least, the Stanford Cardinal, who fired their coach just recently. Not going to get into the details of that. So they have Frank Reich as their interim coach. Kind of an interesting hire, but I like Frank Reich. I thought he was a pretty, decent. I thought he was a good coach when he was in Indianapolis, kind of faded out a little bit. And then Carolina, I mean, it was just not fair for him at 2023. He didn't really get a fair shot, to be honest. And that team was just not good. So of course he was set up to fail, but now he's in an interim role, kind of a different, kind of a shift change. He's coaching in the college landscape now. But you look at the schedule, it's going to be brutal for Stanford. They're by far and away the worst team in the ACC, in my opinion. Although they beat the Louisville Cardinals last season, so who knows? They start off on the road at Hawaii, at BYU, Boston College, at Virginia, San Jose State, at SMU, Florida State, at Miami, Pittsburgh, at North Carolina, Cal, and Notre Dame. And honestly, I might even, so 3.5, I might take the under, because 3-9, like, sure, they could beat at Hawaii, but I wouldn't be surprised if they lose to Hawaii, although Hawaii went like 5-7 last season. But like, it's hard. It's just so hard at Stanford because they are so academically prestigious. It's hard to get players that you want, especially since they had the early signing period. Ever since then, Stanford has just really not been able to compete against these other schools. So kind of running their program like it is a group of 5 school, because they just can't, because they have their standards set for what they want in their school. And respect, but also there's some consequences with that. Like, they could lose at Hawaii. They could lose at Virginia. They could go winless. They really could. They won't, but they could. And, especially since, they had a coaching change halfway through the offseason, and now he's coming in here, and, Andrew Luck is the general manager of the team. Best of luck. Hope all the luck goes towards you. No pun intended. Yeah, absolutely, it was intended. We'll just see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's what I have. So recap of where I had all the over/under win totals for the entire ACC. So Clemson over 9.5, Louisville over 8.5, Miami over 8.5, SMU over 8.5, Florida State under 7.5, Georgia Tech over 7.5, North Carolina under 7.5, Duke. Did we say over or under Duke? I forgot. I already forgot. That's my consequence for not writing anything down. Kids, if you take away any lessons, write down what your over under is. I said it in the video. I'm not going to repeat myself. NC State under 6.5, Virginia under 6.5, Virginia Tech under 6.5, Boston College under 5.5, Cal. Oh, I skipped Cal. We got to talk about Cal. We got to talk about the Cal Golden Bears. My apologies. We'll talk about you, Cal, who's in the Atlantic Coast Conference, even though they're on the Pacific Coast. Not what we're talking about here today, but Justin Wilcox, he's in his 9th season at Cal, but he has Brian Harsin. That's a familiar name as his offensive coordinator. He was the head coach most recently for the Auburn Tigers, but spent a lot of times, had his most success at Boise State. So they start off on the road against Oregon State, and they have their first home game against Texas Southern, Minnesota. After that, at San Diego State, at Boston College, Duke, North Carolina, at Virginia Tech, Virginia, at Louisville, at Stanford, and SMU to finish it off. So 5.5, I'm going to take the under. You can see them squeak out some wins. I'm not even sure if they can beat Oregon State on the road. I think they will. Coming off of last season, they did finish 6-7, but I don't know. That's tough. It's especially since you have, they could totally lose to Oregon State. I think they'll win Texas Southern, of course. They host Minnesota, but Minnesota is a pretty good team under PJ Fleck. They go on the road to San Diego State. You can't overlook a team like that. I like what Sean Lewis is doing over at SDSU, at Boston College, Duke, North Carolina, at Virginia Tech, Virginia, at Louisville. I'm just repeating the schedule once again. I don't know why I'm doing that, but it's tough. It's really tough. I'm going to take the under. I'm going to take the under just because I just don't think they're going to be able to beat these teams, and the games that they have at home are not certified locked wins in that case. But Now we went over all the ACC teams. So as I mentioned, under 5.5 for Cal, under 5.5 for Pitt. I said over 5.5 for Syracuse, under 4.5 for Wake Forest, and under 3.5 for the Stanford Cardinal. Geez, that just sounds so cruel. Anyway, but yeah. So a little bit of a shorter episode here today. Just because I got my travel schedule, got a lot of busy life outside of the podcasting world, but I'm still trying to give you the best content. But that's going to do it here today. So make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And then you can also listen to us on Spotify or watch us on YouTube. So that's going to do it here today on the Tyler Bright and Early Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Bright, PBJ Productions' official flagship podcast for all things college football center.